Hi, I'm Brittany, a neurodivergent mum and speech pathologist. This is Not Just Theories, where I share what actually works in my real, messy life. Because life doesn't follow a theory. Here's what I actually do. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Not Just Theories. Today is the third in the Little Play series, and the episode is going to be all about what can be one of the trickiest but also the most rewarding parts of parenting, which is playing with our kids. Because, let's be honest, sometimes playing together can feel really natural and joyful, and other times it feels really awkward or exhausting or like we're not doing it right. You might find yourself thinking, I want to connect, but they keep changing the rules, or I have no idea how to make this fun for both of us. If you've ever tried to build a Lego tower while your toddler insists that the blocks are actually sandwiches, well, you'll know what I mean. So today I want to talk about what our role really is in play. A little bit about how to find the sweet spot between being too hands-off and too controlling. So play can stay meaningful and connection-based. Before we jump in, I am going to just acknowledge that everything I'm sharing today comes from a Western perspective, which is one that really values play as a parent-child bonding activity, particularly in modern Western parenting. But around the world, and certainly through history, play looks really different. So in a lot of cultures, children mostly play with siblings or peers, while adults focus on modeling skills or storytelling or community work. So if your experience or your family values look different, that's definitely not wrong. It's just a different way of supporting development, and it's not the way that my family works. So it's not what I'm going to be talking about today. So what I'm sharing today is the perspective we have in my family, which is shaped by my own experience as a kid whose parents played with me, as a speech pathologist who plays with kids, and also as a parent who is trying to balance connection with independence. I'm also, today is going to be really focused on playing with kids, whereas the episode next week is going to be about independent play, or child playing by themselves or with siblings. So listen to next week's episode if you're interested in independent play. Today is about the parent's role in play. So when we join in playing with our kids, different people naturally take on different roles. And I mean, there's no one best role all the time. So each role can be quite useful depending on what your child needs and how much support they're looking for in that moment. So some approaches, like the Hannon early language approach, there are terms that use words like entertainer or the director or the watcher or the tuned in parent. So I like to think of them in slightly different terms, which are maybe a bit more relatable. So here's how I can describe them. So the first role that some parents take on is the role of the performer. So this is what's happening when the parent is doing like all the talking, all the ideas, they're bringing all the energy. So you're often singing or acting or narrating or demonstrating. So this is often what parents do when you're trying to hold your child's attention or show them how something works if they don't know how to play with a toy yet. So this role can be really great for early exposure. So definitely, like if a child just has no idea what to do with something. But if you stay there too long, it can make play feel really one-sided. The other time the performer can really come in handy is when you're trying to distract your child from something else. So this is a great play role to go into when your child is perhaps like at a doctor's appointment and they're really nervous about what's going to happen and you think distraction is going to help them. The performer might help keep their mind off the fact that they're about to get a needle or something. So there's huge benefits to doing this role sometimes, but it's certainly not somewhere you want to sit all the time, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. Another role that parents might take on is something called the director. So this is when you have a plan in your head for how play should go. So this is when you might find yourself saying things like, let's build a tower, or no, the cars go here. So it's usually really well intentioned. The idea comes from wanting to teach or guide your child on maybe how to play with the toys, but it can mean that you accidentally take over. So, if your child's trying to use a parking garage and they're putting the cars on the roof and you're actually saying, no, the cars park in underneath and the roof has a helicopter pattern, that's where the helicopter goes. So you're often trying to teach your child something about the world instead of just letting them explore the toy on their own. And it's not a problem if you do this sometimes. Every parent will do this sometimes. You almost can't help yourself. That's often the role of a parent, is to try and teach, but you just don't want to sit here all the time. Another role that parents might take on is something called the observer. So this is when you sit back and you just watch your child. And this can be a really powerful role because it does give your child space to take the lead and explore on their own. And particularly if you're trying to encourage independent play, that's a really nice place to sit, is in that observer space. But if you are staying there all the time, you are perhaps missing opportunities to connect with your child or to model language. So particularly, again, as a speech pathologist, the reason I'm trying often to encourage parents maybe to not be in that observer role all the time is because the observer's not saying anything and the child's not actually getting any language input during that play experience. And then the fourth role is the one that we tend to try and help parents work into for speech pathology sessions. So when I'm doing therapy with a parent and a child and I'm trying to help them play with their child in a way that's going to benefit their child's language, this dance partner sweet spot is where I want them to be sitting most of the time. So the idea is that the dance partner is tuned in. You're waiting and observing. You're not leading the whole dance, but you are responsive and you're taking your turns and you're following that child's lead. So we talked a bit about this in the early communication series when I talked about serve and return. And again, within play, it's that same idea. You're following your child's rhythm. You're noticing their cues. You're joining in when you're invited. And just like when you're dancing, the steps can change moment to moment. So sometimes you might lead for a little bit and sometimes they do. The goal isn't to always be in one role forever. It's to move between those 4 different roles I've just discussed fluidly based on what your child needs in that play moment and what your goals are, with maybe the spot to be sitting most of the time being that dance partner space. But there are absolutely benefits to observing, to directing, and to performing in some contexts. So, why following their lead matters? As I mentioned in the early communication series, when we follow rather than direct, we're showing our child that their ideas matter. So when we're following their lead, we're saying, I see you, I'm interested in your world. And developmentally, that can be really huge because it helps build confidence and autonomy. And as I mentioned in the early communication series, it builds their language because when a child is leading, they're intrinsically motivated to communicate. They're intrinsically motivated to absorb the language around that scenario. So they're not just responding to our agenda as sort of passive participants. They're inviting us into theirs. So this is that foundation of serve and return, that back and forth interaction in the communication series, but taken to a play level. Every time in play that we mirror or pause, respond or comment instead of asking a question or giving an instruction, we're strengthening those neural connections that underpin communication and emotional regulation. So what it looks like in our home. I'm going to give you an example from our house. We don't have a playroom. I've mentioned that before. We just have little shelves in the living room with a small rotation of toys, and the toy kitchen sits opposite that little 6-cube shelf. And one of the toys that we often have out are the magnet tiles. So I mentioned them in the open-ended play last week. I love them because they can be anything. They can just be used for building. They can be used for other things. And the other day, my daughter came up to me with one of the little triangles, and I saw Sally's triangle shapes, and she came up and gave it to me. And in that situation, it's so easy to just try and name it and tell her almost what she's doing. So like, oh, should we build something? She's just given me a magnet tile. But actually in that scenario, when I sort of waited and I was like, oh, And I didn't say anything about what she'd given me. I just sort of said, oh, and I used my body language to kind of like show her that I was willing to play, but I didn't say what I was going to play with. And then she said, Mama, it's an ice cream. And I was like, oh, okay, it's an ice cream. And I, was then able to realize that she'd given me this isosceles triangle magnet tile. And for her, it was a cone shape. It was an ice cream cone. And then we were able to turn into this little imaginative play story with the ice cream toy. So that small shift from, trying, not that I would have been trying to take over by saying, oh, let's build. It was just by not pausing and giving her the opportunity to give me the information I needed to know what she wanted to do, I would have derailed it. Because if I'd said, oh, let's build, she might have said, okay. Or she might have thought, oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Maybe we'll build a tower for like 2 minutes, but that's not really what I wanted to do. So then I'm going to wander away. Whereas by giving her that opportunity to really be the one who took the lead in deciding what that triangle magnet tile was, she actually sat with it for a while and we played that game. And it's one now that if she does come up to me with a triangle, I'm more likely to understand, oh, that's maybe the game that she's trying to play. So I would have completely derailed it if I'd taken over too soon, even though it would have been so well intentioned. Signs that you might be taking over and you might not even realize it. I've put together a little list of signs that you might be taking over, directing a little bit more than you maybe want to be doing. So one sign is that you might be giving lots of instructions instead of making observations. So that's saying things like, put the block here, rather than a comment like, oh, you made that really tall. If you find yourself correcting your child's ideas, so telling them that's not a bed, that's a box, or it doesn't go there, it goes here, or that's not how you use that toy. And sometimes the sign might be that you're feeling frustrated because they're not playing the way you want them to be. So if they're not following your suggestions, you might be feeling frustrated that they're not playing with the toy properly, or they're not playing the game you wanted them to play. And I think all of that can just be a sign that you might need to sort of pause, take a breath, and shift gears back into sort of what is your goal when you're playing with your child. So this is definitely something I find myself in all the time, especially the one about not playing with toys properly, because I can be quite rigid about this is this toy and this is what it's for. And when it's used creatively, it's actually quite hard for me sometimes to accept that. But that's a me problem and I'm working on it, and it's something that awareness is that first step, right? So I need to be aware that my rigidity around toys isn't necessarily, right. Toys can be anything. So when I catch myself there, maybe in that directing role or giving rules that don't need to be part of that game, I need to shift that gear back into when I'm playing with my child, what's the intention? And the first intention is always connection. I'm aiming to fill their cup. I want them to know that I love them. I want them to know that I'm interested in them and who they are. And by me taking over and directing, I'm not necessarily achieving those goals. The other goal that I often have when I am playing or interacting with my child is to teach them and to teach them language. And as I mentioned in that early communication series, just as with play and connection, for language, I want to be following their lead as well. So trying to tell them what not to do is not going to be the greatest basis for teaching them language either. So it's not really achieving any of my goals to fall into that director role. So trying to shift from that directing role to the dance partner role, I do some simple language swaps. So instead of saying something like, oh, do this or put this here, I often try and switch into more cognitive or thinking words. Things like, I wonder what would happen if. So if I'm wanting to give an idea because my child's looking a bit stuck, rather than telling them what to do next, I might phrase it as an option like, oh, I wonder what would happen if we built it up higher. I wonder what would happen if my ice cream melted. If I'm wanting to say, no, that's not how it works, then that's usually a good sign that I should say, whoa, that's an interesting idea. I'd never thought of playing with that toy that way. What do you want to do next? So sort of acknowledging that maybe it isn't what I was expecting, but turning it into, it's not the end of the game. I'm not having to redirect them back to what I think it should be. Anytime I feel that need to say that is not how it works, I'm switching to that was really interesting, or I hadn't thought of doing it that way. Obviously, it's different if they're doing something dangerous. It's always different if they're doing something dangerous with a toy. No, the hockey stick is not for hitting your sister in the head. Let's go and hit this ball over here with it is perfectly valid. You're allowed to redirect your child if they're doing something dangerous. If you are wanting to expand on the play and your child feels like they're getting stuck just doing the same thing over and over, instead of telling them, hey, let's do this next. So we're having a tea party and we've just been pouring the tea, drinking the tea, pouring the tea, drinking the tea, pouring the tea, drinking the tea, and we feel a bit stuck there. Rather than saying, oh, let's do this, I could say, something went wrong, and let them tell me what went wrong. Like, did I spill the tea, or is it too hot? But sort of prompting it with a bit more of an open-ended prompt rather than telling them that something happened. So that sort of statement can kind of keep the ownership either with your child or under their guidance, but it still invites that collaboration and conversation. I did say before that all of these roles have reasons for which you would actually use them. So, the tuned in dance partner is the one that you probably want to be most of the time, but the other 3 roles, just to remind you, were the performer, the director, or the observer. It's all about balance. So if your child is feeling really lost or disengaged, stepping in with the energy and the ideas from the performer can spark momentum, or even coming in with a little bit of direction is not a problem. If your child is doing something that maybe they shouldn't do, or you're a bit worried where they look like they might be heading with it, a little bit of direction is okay. If your child is really deeply engaged in independent play, that's a great cue to hang back and observe quietly rather than joining in and trying to be the dance partner. So you're actually more of a dimmer switch. You're not an on-off button. Sometimes they need more light and energy from you, and sometimes they just need you nearby. And sometimes they want you in that nice middle ground as well. Because at the end of the day, the goal isn't anything about the play. It's about the connection. Play is how children learn. And it's not just how they learn language, it's how they learn how the world works. So when we show interest and engage with them in the play, we're showing interest in how your child's brain works. We're helping them grow and develop. And again, it's not that there's anything wrong with those roles. And if you find yourself slipping more into one than the other, every one of those 3, observer, director, and performer, the 3, I guess, slightly less ideal interaction types, every single one of those has an amazing role at different times. That observer is probably going to be someone who really deeply understands what their child actually wants to do, but maybe doesn't feel as comfortable playing with the toys themselves. But when it comes time to actually moving towards being more of a dance partner, they're going to go in really intentionally and sort of knowing what to do because they're going to be matching where their child's at. So it's actually quite an easy step in some ways to go from that observer role, the watcher, into the play once you've given that little bit of confidence about how to play, because you will be meeting your child where you're at. If you're someone who's the more likely to be the entertainer, you're often, the life of the party. When there's lots of kids around, you can be there and you can everyone wants to be part of the play. It's really fun for a child to be around a performer or an entertainer. It's just that they're not necessarily getting that self-direction or the ability to play independently or explore their own ideas when they're around that performer. They're more of a follower at that point. But they have a lot of fun, so it's absolutely fantastic. Like I said, in those scenarios, like you're trying to distract your kid from something bad that's happening, or you're trying to keep them awake because they're trying to nap and it's not time for them to nap yet and you desperately need to keep them awake in the car. There's lots of reasons to fall into that performer role that can be quite helpful. But again, when you're thinking about connection, it's maybe not quite as ideal as that dance partner role. And then the director, that usually comes from someone who's really trying to teach their kids something. So this is the role that I find myself falling into the most commonly. And it's the one where you really want to just take over because you can see where the play could go, or you want your kid to learn how to do something that's really important to you. So again, not a problem. Like, it is coming from a place, of good intentions. It's just, when you're wanting to connect with your child, when you're wanting them to develop their play skills, it's maybe a role to back off on a little bit and go more into letting your child lead. I hope that little discussion makes sense. We do ideally as a speech pathologist, where I want parents to fall is in that dance partner role more of the time and moving there from whichever of the other three roles is their most natural. So often our first session is spent observing them playing with their child and seeing what their natural instincts are. Everyone sort of falls into one of those three camps. Not to say that I don't ever have parents come in who are already wonderful dance partners. A lot of parents shift in and out of that dance partner role naturally already. And my role as a speech pathologist is to help guide them into that role more of the time. So missing fewer opportunities to be in that responsive dance partner role. Often by identifying which of the other three is their starting point, you can then tailor the strategies that I teach towards what they're going to need to work on the most. So someone who's more into entertainment and entertaining their child, the strategies I tend to work on more are about watching and waiting and following the child's lead. Someone who's more of a director, I tend to work more on things like reducing questions, reducing instructions, and commenting instead. And for someone who's a watcher, it's more about joining in the play and giving them ideas on things that they can do to join in without actually accidentally moving into a director or an entertaining role by taking over too much. So by understanding which of those three you fall into, you can sort of more selectively use language or play strategies to move towards being that dance partner. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, please reach out to me. I'm happy to chat to people about what their natural play style might be with their child. And if you're wanting to move more towards that dance partner, maybe what some of the strategies are that you could personally focus on a little bit more than others. And like I said before, but in some cultures, kids don't play with the adults in that culture. So I'm not telling anyone that they do need to go out and sit and play with their child if they don't want to. Children can learn through other means. They can learn through play with other kids rather than with adults. But if you are someone who's wanting to play with your child and, you've been wondering, am I doing it right? I hope that this episode has been a bit of a reminder that there is not just one right way. There's just a way that perhaps brings a little bit more connection to your child than what a natural instinct might. Next week, I'll be talking a little bit more about play, and that episode is going to be all about independent play, which is going to be a bit about how to encourage it, how to make peace with boredom, and why independent play can be such an important part of healthy development for both kids and parents. But also a little bit about temperament and how temperament can affect independent play, because it is a massive component on independent play and whether or not it actually happens for your particular child. So until next week, I hope everyone has a wonderful time trying to lean more into being that responsive dance partner and let your kids lead the dance. See where it goes. Have a great week. Thanks so much for listening to Not Just Theories. I really appreciate you being here. If this episode resonated with you, the best way to support the show is to follow, leave us a rating or review, or just share this episode with someone else who you think might find it comforting or useful. I hope to see you back here soon.